Thank you. I recognize the member from Carleton, Mississippi Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a pleasure to rise in the House to speak to Bill 139, the Building Better Communities and Conserving Watersheds Act of 2017. There are two problems with this bill, Mr. Speaker. One is that it will end the Ontario Municipal Board, which provides a valuable appeal process to the people of Ontario that is much needed and serves a very worthy purpose. And the other is that it gives enhanced powers to the conservation authorities across Ontario, an organization which also already has powers to do excessive things, to place land use restrictions on private property, and takes away people's ability to use, enjoy, and prosper from the wealth of their property. First, I'd like to speak to the Ontario Municipal Board part of this bill. This bill completely upends the land use planning process by ending the Ontario Municipal Board, which provides for an impartial appeals process. It also gives new and wide-reaching powers to conservation authorities without creating greater oversight and review of their mandate. Mr. Speaker, this is yet another example of Liberal government chaos, organized chaos through a confusing, disjointed omnibus bill. The OMB, Teresa McClenahan from the Canadian Environmental Law Association, recommends that all schedules in the bill about land use planning be removed. There must be more public consultation on the reform of Ontario's land use planning system. Bill 139 will put added pressures on our already overburdened court system. The Canadian Environmental Law Association believes the OMB offers a forum for citizens to participate in reviews of land use planning. According to the Canadian Environmental Law Association, the new procedures outlined in Bill 139 will get rid of essential procedural rights and substantive protections available under the current land use law and policy. There are many problems with this bill. Here is a short list of some of the more significant consequences. It would decimate the board's jurisdiction and powers and reduce the number of matters that may be appealed to the new Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. It would limit the grounds of appeal. It would limit participation in hearings. It would restrict decision-making authority, and the yet as unwritten rules of practice of the new tribunal would prevail over the province's Statutory Powers Procedure Act, where there is a conflict over those procedural safeguards. Mr. Speaker, the environmental lawyers do not think the OMB should be abolished. I would like to ask the government why they decided to remove 2 days' worth of public hearings on this bill. Are they afraid that Ontarians will show this is a bad bill? Are they afraid of criticism? If the purpose of this bill is to reduce a citizen's ability to appeal municipal decisions that may infringe upon property rights, then I understand why government would want to cut public hearings. As Sign Leask from the Advocates for Effective OMB Reform put it, this bill will do more harm than good. The new process, as outlined in this bill, will take longer, be more costly, and make mediation less likely. According to the Society of Professional Engineers, Bill 139 will compound and exacerbate the problems that exist within the current land use planning system. The bill will also create new problems or other unintended consequences. The biggest danger of this new bill is that it damages the appeals process for land use planning. It damages the appeals process for major developers, and it damages the appeals process for the ordinary, hard-working people of Ontario. The new bill makes it harder for applicants to get a municipal decision overturned. People make mistakes, and there must be a forum where those mistakes can be tested and adjusted when necessary. The OMB is not just a forum for debate, it also serves as a watchdog for open and transparent tests to policy decisions. Once the OMB is gone, what institution will provide this necessary oversight to municipal policy? Right now, courts have decided that municipalities do not have to hold fair hearings at the local level because of their right of appeal to the OMB. If the government gets rid of the OMB, Mr. Speaker, they open the door to a flood of court challenges. Without the OMB, there must be an appeals process at the local level. This puts a heavy burden on municipalities, and it will be particularly hard for smaller municipalities who may not have the resources to process appeals. This bill gives too much power to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. It makes them the only person who can appeal certain municipal plans. The public transit plans or an interim control bylaw will no longer be appealable. Also, any plan when the minister has approved authority can no longer be appealed. This gives too much power to one person, Mr. Speaker. This bill also gives too much power to municipal councillors. Local politicians are susceptible to political pressure from special interest groups who may be opposed to specific projects for reasons that are not justified. Take the case of Linwood Charlton of Hamilton. Linwood Charlton, an accredited children's mental health centre, operates a residential care facility for adolescent girls with mental health issues. When they needed a new home, residents in the local area mounted a campaign and put pressure on municipal and planning officials to reject the application because these residents did not want the facility in their neighbourhood. Linwood Charlton's application was rejected by Municipal Council, but they appealed to the OMB and won. Under the new bill, Linwood Charlton would not be able to meet the new strict guidelines. Under the new bill, the new tribunal would not be able to call or examine witnesses. This deprives applicants of the ability to address biased opinions against them, and it deprives the tribunal from being able to consider expert testimony. Mr. Speaker, this is an infringement upon the basic rights of appeal. It is an affront to equality, to justice, and to fairness. On conservation authorities. Conservation authorities were created in 1946 to control soil erosion and water levels in Ontario lakes and streams to protect private property. This was necessary to ensure economic development, but they have evolved. Conservation authorities are more interested in restricting land use on private property. Bill 139 only continues this pattern of applying land use restrictions to private property. For example, conservation authorities will now be allowed to issue permits to people to engage in prohibited activities. Activities such as developing on hazardous lands, wetlands, or interfering with an existing water channel can now be done with the approval of a conservation authority. Conservation authorities should not have a monopoly over whether a person or company can engage in activities as important as these. The government thinks it's protecting the environment with this bill, but it is not. Sometimes it is necessary to manage the environment and natural features in order to support good land use planning strategies or to maintain waterhead drainage features. With this bill, the government is also ignoring all the pain this law and previous laws caused. Decisions made by conservation authorities force good, hard-working people to go to court to fight for their private property rights. Some of these cases last many, many years. These court fights cause great emotional, physical, and mental stress on people. The conservation authorities are telling farmers they cannot farm, but farming is their way of life. So what are they to do? This bill is effectively expropriation without compensation. Saving wetlands, woodlands, special features lands, and endangered species is a desirable thing to do, but this should not be at the expense of property owners, unless property owners are properly compensated. If it is in the public interest, the public should pay. These designations can have financially disastrous consequences for property owners. A designation can devalue a property by up to 85%. Without adequate compensation, property owners are robbed of significant income when they sell their property. For property owners not planning to sell, a designation puts severe restrictions on what they can do. Restrictions on building a structure like a house, a barn, or a shed. Even something as simple as adding a porch or repairing an old porch can be restricted. This is because property owners cannot change the footprint. If a property owner did not raise farm animals, a designation would restrict them from doing so in the future. There are also restrictions on filling up low hollows in fields. Property owners who undertake these necessary improvements to their farmlands risk fines and court visits. Once designations are placed on a property, each action I just mentioned requires a permit and many studies. An environmental study, a species at risk study, flooding studies, and more. Not only that, there are also requests for consultant engineers' reports on the effects of the potential change, all at the property owner's expense. In some instances, these designations are wrong designations. Water diverted from roads and quarries ends up on fields that are private property. This is a drainage problem. These fields should not be called wetlands. To make matters worse, conservation authorities do not always follow their own wetland designations. In some cases, conservation authorities have prevented someone from building in order to preserve a wetland, only to allow a developer a few years later to fill in the wetlands and build a housing or commercial development such as happened in Stittsville in my riding. In 2014, the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority granted a permit that allowed for the drainage of the wetland in Stittsville of the Upper Pool Creek wetland. This was to make way for a shopping mall development. What used to be significant wetlands in Stittsville has been transformed into a massive residential development, equipped with a giant tiger, an RBC bank, and of course an LCBO. Conservation authorities clearly do not have an issue with developing wetlands. They simply have an issue with private landowners building or farming on their own lands. Conservation authorities are supposed to be protecting wetlands, not destroying legitimate wetlands when shifting the wetland designation onto a landowner's property. Since our Constitution of 1867 and our Crown grants give property owners the right to own, use, and enjoy their land, property owners can pass down these rights to their heirs. With property rights comes the obligation to be responsible, to be a good steward of the land, to be considerate of your neighbor. I want to tell you the long, sad story of what the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority did to Alex and Tanya Gilmore. Over the last 10 years, the Gilmores tried to build their house on their 10-acre building lot in Simcoe County. The Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority said no to their building permit application because the 100-year flood level would prevent emergency vehicles from reaching their new home. The Gilmores appealed to several tribunals and courts over many years. They ended up at the Ontario Superior Court in 2015, where a panel of 3 judges stated that the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority had overstepped their jurisdiction. They granted the Gilmores the right to build. The Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority appealed to the Court of Appeal of Ontario in 2017, where a panel of 3 judges ruled against the Gilmores. The Gilmore case is now being appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. What a waste. All this trouble, time, and expense just so the Gilmores can build their home on their lot like all their neighbors have done, along the same road on lots severed off the same farm. This is an abuse of power and authority by the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority. It wrongfully removed the property rights of the Gilmore family, their right to build their home on their property. This is a glaring example of an unaccountable conservation authority acting in bad faith and willfully hurting Ontario people. This insidious and irresponsible action and attitude by a conservation authority is prevalent throughout conservation authorities in Ontario. The solution to this problem is to put in place an effective system of oversight and accountability over all conservation authorities in Ontario. The best way to do this would be to restore conservation authorities to their original 1946 mandate to control water levels and protect against erosion in the lakes and streams of Ontario. That would be good conservation. That would be good for the Gilmores. Mr. Speaker, this is a bad bill. It was hastily crafted and will have drastic impacts on developers, landowners, and average citizens in Ontario. It is not too late. The government can still save itself and withdraw this bad bill. Thank you.
Questions and comments?